All right, the topic of this video is the bureaucracy. So, bottom line, most of our focus in the executive branch is on the president, but this is really the group of people that makes up the rest of the executive branch. So, what is the bureaucracy? The bureaucracy are all of the departments and agencies within the executive branch. It's kind of like a dry sounding name, but we're just talking about the dozens and dozens of federal agencies that actually exist and work under the president in the executive branch. So we're talking about all the cabinet positions in this level. We're talking about all of these other agencies. We're talking about millions of people that actually work within the executive branch. And obviously we only have one president, but it's all of these other agencies and groups that sort of do the work on behalf of the president. That's what we call the bureaucracy. All of these agencies, whether they're cabinet departments that we've already gone over a little bit, or some of these other agencies, they really have two major responsibilities. The first is that they inform and educate the president. Each one of these agencies specializes in something, and clearly the president doesn't have enough time to research everything on his own. The president doesn't know everything. So the job of these agencies is to be experts in whatever they're doing, and then to inform the president so that he can make appropriate decisions. The other major job of all of these agencies within the bureaucracy is that they actually do the business of governing, right? Congress makes the laws, but it's really up to the executive branch to enforce them. And that's the job of all of these agencies is to actually carry out the law and to make sure people are essentially following it, right? That Congress has the easy job. They just make the law, and then it's really up to the agencies in the executive branch to implement it. So these are the two major jobs that these dozens and dozens of agencies have, is they kind of educate the president a little bit about topics that they're specializing in, and then they actually carry out and enforce the laws. So there are a couple different parts of the bureaucracy. There are different levels and categories of these government agencies that sort of make up the part of the executive branch. So the one that you're most familiar with are the cabinet positions, and you essentially have these 15 positions that have been created throughout history. Each of these departments deals with pretty broad responsibilities. So for each of these levels that we're going to talk about, it's good to know kind of what they do, but then know some specific examples. So these cabinet departments are all led by an individual, like a Secretary of Defense, a Secretary of Homeland Security. And again, the departments have pretty broad responsibilities, right? They deal with a lot. Examples would be the State Department, right? It deals with foreign affairs, Homeland Security, Department of Education, commerce, the economy, agriculture. These are really broad sort of responsibilities, and they deal with a lot of things. The deal with the cabinet is probably 100 years ago, the cabinet secretaries, the leaders of the cabinet departments were probably a president's closest advisors. I think if you look in modern times, they've definitely lost a bit of their importance. And I don't think presidents rely on their cabinet like they used to. And we'll kind of talk about why in a second. If you look at all of the people that work within the 15 cabinet departments, again, we're talking about over 1 million people, right, that work for cabinet departments, in the executive branch, right? It's a lot of employees. The largest cabinet department is the Department of Defense. We're talking about over 670,000 individuals, right, that essentially are there working within that department. That's a lot of employees. That's the largest of the cabinet departments. And the smallest is the Department of Education with just over 4,000 employees. But we're talking about a ton of people, right? And again, education, the national government doesn't have as many people working in the Department of Education because the states are dealing with a lot of the education matters. But the largest department is Department of Defense. Smallest is the Department of Education. And then it's taken a while in American history for the cabinet to sort of be a diverse group of people. Diversity within the cabinet was pretty slow in terms of who was leading the cabinet departments. It's not until 1933 where the first female, Frances Perkins, was nominated and confirmed to be the Secretary of Labor under Franklin Roosevelt. Pretty significant time period to be the person leading the Department of Labor. because we're dealing with the aftermath of the Depression during this time period. And it's not until 1966 where you have your first African American cabinet secretary. Robert Weaver was chosen to lead the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So the cabinets today tend to be a little bit more diverse, but that was a pretty slow sort of change that has transpired throughout American history. The next group within the bureaucracy that we're going to talk about is the Executive Office of the President. Sometimes we just refer to this as the EOP. This group that you see on the screen has replaced the cabinet in modern times as the president's most trusted advisors. All of these individuals have offices within the White House, which give them close proximity to the president. The other major advantage is, unlike cabinet secretaries that have to be nominated and then approved by the Senate, people that lead departments within the executive office of the president don't have to get like Senate approval. They don't have to, testify before the Senate and go through that very public job interview with senators. So oftentimes a president will fill these positions with close trusted allies and kind of prevent them from having to go through that pretty grueling Senate confirmation process. An example of somebody that works in the executive office of the president is the press secretary, the person every day that's responsible for like meeting with the press and being the spokesperson on behalf of the president, asking questions, announcing plans, those types of things. Biden's current press secretary is Jen Psaki. So again, Biden just hired her. She didn't have to go through the Senate nomination process. The next level within the bureaucracy are called independent executive agencies. Like a cabinet department, they're led by a director, like a single person. The cabinet departments, their leaders are called secretaries. And they're just directors that lead the independent executive agencies. So that's a similarity with cabinet departments. But like a difference is that they tend to be much more narrowly focused in their responsibilities than like a cabinet department. Like their tasks are very specific. So for example, agencies that are independent executive agencies that you would have heard of before, like NASA deals with like space. The CIA is dealing with like collecting information about foreign countries. The EPA is like the Environmental Protection Agency, deals with maintaining the environment, enforcing environmental policy, or like the FBI, which is sort of like the national sort of like law enforcement agency. All of these are led by like the director of the FBI, NASA director of the CIA, right? But they just don't have as many responsibilities as the cabinet departments. They're a little bit more narrowly focused in what they have to do. The next group of agencies, we call them independent regulatory commissions. The difference is that they are led by a board of 5 to 7 people. They're not led by one person, like the independent agencies and the cabinet departments. They're led by a group, like a board of 5 to 7 people. Like the other two we've looked at so far, they're appointed by the president. So again, just led by a group and not necessarily by a single individual. Also, what makes these a little bit unique is they generally deal with some aspect of like the economy, like they're dealing with economic stuff. So, for example, the Securities and Exchange Commission. That's an example of an independent regulatory commission. We call it the SEC for short. That regulates like the stock market. The one to the right, Consumer Product Safety Commission. That's the organization that oversees like all the products in the country that are manufactured and made, and tries to keep the people buying them like relatively safe. So, for example, sometimes during like the holiday season, you'll see like recalls of toys that have little pieces break off because they're like a choking hazard for the small children that would play with them. That would have been issued by the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So again, these guys are led by a board and they deal with some aspect of the economy. And then the last set of government agencies that exist within the bureaucracy, they're called government corporations. Basically, these organizations provide some sort of like valuable service to the people that at one time, it could be done now by a private company. And at one time in our country's history, it was done by a private company. But then the companies that were providing that service to the people couldn't make money doing it anymore. So they just stopped providing the service. But the government's attitude was like, well, it's still an important service and we can't not have the citizens have access to that service. So the government then takes over that service. So, for example, the TVA stands for the Tennessee Valley Authority. it's an organization that provides power to like rural America. Well, like companies couldn't make money doing that anymore, but the government can't just let those citizens not have access to like electricity. So like they took over the TVA, and now the government runs the Tennessee Valley Authority. The United States Postal Service, like mail in this country, used to be delivered by like private companies, and then those companies stopped because it wasn't profitable anymore. But the government's attitude was like, well, we can't just not let you have like mail or have access to mail. So the government takes over that responsibility, and now USPS is run by right the federal government and loses millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars by running it every single year. Amtrak, many of you probably have been on an Amtrak train before. This is not SEPTA, but this is Amtrak, like the train that would run like out of state, might take it to Florida. Well, like that's actually, believe it or not, run by the government. Right? Most people don't know that. 100 years ago, rail travel used to be done by all private companies, but then it stopped being profitable. But the government's attitude was like, we can't not have like rail service that runs across the country, so we'll take it over. And again, the bottom line with most of these is that they cause the government to lose large amounts of money, but the government still feels like it's a service that the citizens of the country have to have access to.